Tranquility du Jour, February 18th, 2019. Hello there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 444th edition of Tranquility du Jour. I'm recording here from Costa Rica, and we are here leading a retreat. It's, probably my 15th time here, and it's Tranquility in the Tropics. So yoga twice a day, mindfulness incorporated into all of it, and then art journaling in the afternoons. So we started yesterday. This is day 2. And absolutely delighted to be here with sunshine, papaya, blue skies. So it's a real treat and a big happy President's Day to those of you who are stateside. Also, I've recorded a few videos, and then there's also some photos that I'll be posting over on Instagram. So feel free to follow along there, and you can find me at Tranquility du Jour. Also, the show notes for this week's episode, which is an interview with the lovely Kat O'Leary, we're discussing creative expression, inner struggles, her year of new project, which I just think is genius, and how to get out of your own way to do the work. So it's funny, I have a list of quite a few recorded podcasts from the past couple of months. And so I read the different topics to my mother, and I'm like, okay, which one do you want to hear this week? And she's like, the creativity one. So Kat, it is your week. And you can follow along. You can get the show notes to this episode at kimberlywilson.com/444. Also, a big thank you to those of you who reached out and let me know that you enjoyed last week's episode on transitioning careers. It's a tough topic, and it's also tricky to know when is it time to move on. One of the readings I shared today was from a book called Daily Ohm, and it's about the importance of how trees shed their bark whenever they have outgrown the bark and, need to grow and expand. And I think it's one of those things that's just important for us as humans to remember and think about too. When is it time to shed certain barriers or certain beliefs or certain defenses in order to make room for what's to come, what's next, and ways in which we can grow, always a little beyond our comfort zone. Also similar to, how a shape sheds its skin. Now, if you're new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link in the show notes that is all about, if you're new, come on over here, and it tells a little bit about the history of Tranquility du Jour. Been blogging since 2004, podcasting since 2005, and just delighted to have new and old listeners. Also, if you're not yet subscribed to my love notes, I'll be sending one out from Costa Rica this week, so be sure to sign up. You can do that at kimberlywilson.com/love notes. And of course, I love connecting with you on multiple platforms. So my go-to though these days is Insta, so you can find me there. And also a big thank you to those of you who tuned in on Friday for the Tranquility Spring Line sneak peek. I hope you enjoyed seeing all the new designs. There's 8 new designs, and there's a blog post that you can find at kimberlywilson.com/blog that shows each of the 8 new designs that are coming in March. And again, a reminder, Tranquility, it's locally sewn using eco-friendly fabrics, and it's vegan, and it just is so yummy. It's like the perfect layering piece. And so I hope you love the new collection, the new designs. And again, you can find those online, and they'll be available in March with a brand new color, Burleigh, which I'm kind of obsessed with. It's so feminine, so sweet. And I believe the Pantone is actually called like Smoky Rose or Rose Smoke. And then also we, of course, have Peach, which is like the Pantone color of the year. Who knew? Now, I also wanted to mention, for anyone who's available on International Women's Day, which is March 8th, I'm going to be doing an online book launch. And Year of Tranquility came out, probably 3-4 weeks ago. And it's my latest book, my 6th book. And you can find out more about it at kimberlywilson.com/YOT. And then whenever you do, you'll find the information also to join us for this special live event. And what's great too, those of you who are Kindle users and prefer that over paper, that is just now available. It just came out last week, and that's available at Amazon.com for $9.99. So again, whenever you buy through Amazon.com, you will then in turn have access to 4 different bonuses, including actually this 5th one, which is the online book launch on International Women's Day. Hope you can join us. Also save the date for March 24th. which is my seasonal TDJ Live. So it's a fun event where we just look at ways to find more tranquility in the everyday. Also, I wanted to mention 2 exciting Pigs and Pugs project events that are coming up, and that's my nonprofit with the goal of making pigs and pugs happier across the United States. And April 28th, which is a Sunday, is Pigs, Pugs, and Pinot at a wine bar in DC. And then on June 8th is Yoga and the Animals at Burleigh Manor Animal Sanctuary, which includes an all-level yoga practice, a private tour of the sanctuary, and a vegan lunch. And then finally, join me in Tuscany. So Tuscany is going to be a delightful experience in the hills at a private villa, yoga, creativity, mindfulness, and also includes a day trip to Cinque Terre, which is this beautiful, beautiful seaside, or a coastal seaside town. Absolutely stunning. And would love to have you. And we have a few spots left for that. Also, thank you to everyone who reached out, excited about the DC immersion experience that I mentioned a couple podcasts back. And I am in the process of kind of whipping that together. Really appreciate your enthusiasm and just looking for like the perfect experience and thinking spring or summer. Although summer in DC can be quite hot. Spring is so, so stunning. So we'll see if I can get things pulled together by then. But my idea and my vision for it is really, how do we bring the Tranquility Salon experience, or really like these week-long retreat experiences, into a weekend where we can really dive into experiencing yummy local vegan food, beautiful surroundings, and this focus on reflection, intention setting, and really personal growth and discovery. So stay tuned for that. And thank you again for your enthusiasm. Now, without further ado, Kat O'Leary. She's a life artist, storyteller, and dreamer/planner. She blogs at Spirit for Skeptics, where she writes about creative productivity and practical spirituality. In 2016, she launched the Year of a New project, doing one new thing every day and documenting her progress on Instagram. She also co-hosts the Hallmark Christmas movie podcast, Business Christmas, and is at work on a novel. 3 novels she writes. In her free time, Kat volunteers for Read, 718, and the New York Junior League. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, Kimberly. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you for being here. I'm so delighted to chat with you about Spirit for Skeptics and Year of New project and creativity in general. So thank you.
No, thank you. I'm really, really super excited to chat with you today. So I'm glad to be here.
So let's chat about, you've got a blog titled Spirit for Skeptics. So I love the name. And so can you give us a little bit of background about where this came from?
Sure. So I think really, as I think happens with a lot of projects, I created this because it was something, frankly, that I needed a few years ago. So I think I used to be one of those skeptics in the title, and now I am decidedly less so. So there were a lot of kind of spiritual tools that I've used over the past few years, beginning with Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, and some other books and other I started meditating. I've been doing yoga for a long time, but I think about what yoga means to me a little bit differently now. I've got a bunch of crystals in my apartment, as do I think many people at this point. And so all of these things are things that I probably, do talk to me maybe 3 or 4 years ago, would have been very skeptical about, and would have had these ideas about the types of people who rely on self-help or personal development books, or the types of people who believe in, as I like to call it, the love of the universe. And what I have found was, I've now gotten to a place where, having used a lot of these tools and gotten value out of them, I've been trying to figure out, well, how do I share this information with people who are coming at spirituality from a place that's maybe similar to where I was just a short time ago.
Well, one thing that you just mentioned that I made me giggle is crystals, and how so many people Yeah, it's such a thing now. So can you give us a little bit of background about why you have them and what you found to be helpful or beneficial about them?
Yeah. So one, I think they're just beautiful, right? So I always would have gotten that value out of them. But I do think, and I guess I'll talk about this from a practical standpoint. I think that having, let's say a rose quartz crystal, which is usually associated with love. If I want to go through my day coming at things from a place of love versus fear, and I might, put a rose quartz crystal in my pocket, and that sort of sets the intention for me of, I want this is the intention that I want to go through my day with. And I may not be able to control what other people are throwing at me, what external things are going on around me. But the one thing that I can control is, how I choose to respond to these things. And I think when you kind of, when you're able to focus around an intention, it helps you, remember that that's where you're coming at things from during the day. Sorry, that was that was not my most eloquent sentence.
No, it is interesting. It's the rose quartz. I've received a few of those over the years. They're so beautiful, from like the small kind of pocket stones that are really smooth to like the chunky, heavier sort of like book weight sort of, or bookend sort of. Or paperweight. That's the word I'm looking for. Paperweight sort of thing. Yeah. And they're great. And I have them in my bedroom too, because it's like, oh, it's supposed to help with love. So.
Right. No, I actually have a handful of rose quartz wands, or specifically the obelisks that stand up on my nightstand. And I do think, one, it kind of beautifies the space more. And then two, it does kind of set that intention. So I'm right there with you.
Is there a particular book or resource that you'd recommend for any listeners who are interested in learning more about crystals?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think I have honestly been doing most of my research using Google. I do actually have a book on my Kindle that is available through Kindle Unlimited, I believe. And I'm not sure I know the name of it, but if you search Amazon for books about crystals, it's called Crystals for Beginners.
Easy.
Yeah, super easy, and I believe it's available on Kindle Unlimited, so you can access it for free. And I don't think it's very expensive otherwise. But I also took a Crystals 101 course at a boutique near me in Brooklyn, and it was taught by a woman named Mariah Simmons. And she's really great. So she's a spiritual healer. She also offers Reiki sessions, and she made us all a little crystals zine that we could take home with us and use as a reference, which I thought was really cool.
Of course you had a crystals 101, like in Brooklyn,
Yep.
I'm sure those will be popping up around everywhere, but of course in Brooklyn. I love it.
Yeah, it was really great. I enjoyed it a lot. And I actually have been to Mariah for Reiki since then. So definitely liked her as well.
Now, in the bio of your blog, you talk a bit about inner struggles. Huge challenge, it sounds like, in 2017. And, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how, that led to the creation of this blog and where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting because whenever I give people sort of the elevator speech on my 2017, the response is usually, oh, wow, you had such a horrible year. And actually, I think I had a great year. And so the short story is my boyfriend of almost 3 years kind of broke up with me out of nowhere. And then I got fired, not out of nowhere, but, had never really been fired from a professional job before. So that was kind of a new thing for me. And it's interesting because I think if you had talked to me in maybe early 2016 and told me that both of these things were on the horizon, I would have expected myself to be absolutely devastated. Historically, I've been a pretty high anxiety person, not always great at dealing with setbacks or adversity, and really someone who I built my identity on around a lot of external things, which now I believe is probably never a great idea because you can't control anything you can't control. once you've kind of pinned an identity for yourself around it, if anything happens that, you know, gets in the way of your achieving whatever that external thing is, it can be very, very damaging to your conception of yourself. And so I think on some level, maybe had sensed that something about the way that I was dealing with things to date at that point wasn't quite working, because I'd sort of begun dabbling in different ways to, work through some of my issues prior to that. So one is that I started going to a therapist once a week in late 2015. And that was something where I was finally willing to show up and do some serious work on myself and understand my patterns better so that I would, cease repeating them the way I had done for, frankly, my entire life. And then the other thing was I mentioned Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. I talk about that book a lot because I think it was sort of my gateway woo. So it was, there were certain spiritual things and wellness things that I've been doing for years. As I mentioned, yoga. Obviously, I've listened to your podcast forever, as you know. So there was always some part of me that was interested in all of these things, and yet there was such resistance to exploring them more. But I kind of got to a point where I knew that whatever I was doing wasn't working, and I was willing to try literally anything else to fix things. And fortunately, I started laying the groundwork for that through therapy, through doing some reading, doing some deep thinking on myself, my background, my patterns, things ideas, kind of old stories that I had about myself that weren't really serving me anymore. And so when these two would be catastrophic things happen, I already had the tools in place to really deal with them from a position of grace and strength. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt like I was resilient.
Yeah, which is huge. And, one thing that you touch on, and you do even mention in your bio, is the importance of finding a good therapist. And as a fellow therapist, I'm just curious, what would you advise listeners, for your search? How did you find the right therapist for you?
So I wish I had a better answer for you, Kimberly. But I honestly really just lucked into finding the right person. So I simply went on ZocDoc. I found someone who took my insurance. I picked a practice based on the online reviews. And I guess probably the specific things that I needed help with. And I was randomly assigned to a therapist in that practice. And it turned out that was the exact person that I needed to be working with. And so my therapist, it's funny because I think on the surface, I wouldn't have expected that we'd have a ton in common. So she's, about 10 years older than me, but grew up in Ukraine, and spent half her adult life there and half her adult life in the States. And so based on our backgrounds, you wouldn't necessarily see that many similarities, but it was so interesting to me how for every single story I would tell her about my life, she had one that was analogous from either her own life or things she had observed in the lives of others. And so we really connected. She really understood me. And I wish that I could say, oh, I did, these very intentional things and I looked for X, Y, and Z. But honestly, I think I just feel like I got very lucky on this one.
Yeah, so you didn't have to do the whole kind of searching through Psychology Today and filtering by zip code and looking for someone that, and doing the whole interview process. It sounds like you just kind of landed in a good spot.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I was skeptical going into our first meeting. I was thinking, I don't know if this person's the right fit. And then when I met her, I immediately, all of those doubts went out the window and I knew she was the right person. And I actually, quote unquote, graduated from therapy about a year ago now, after working with her for a little over 2 years. And, it really just changed my life. And so I feel very lucky that I was able to have that experience, because I've had a lot of friends who've gone through therapy and haven't quite found that exact fit. And as a result, some of the things that I was dealing with were achievement orientation, constant feelings of failure and guilt, you know, uh, I think things that a lot of people, and probably a lot of women in particular, deal with. And so I've actually referred her to a few friends as well, just because I think the work that we did together was so transformative for me.
Well, one piece that you mentioned too is graduating from therapy. And
Yeah.
I think that, for some listeners that might be surprising, like, oh, I thought you had a therapist forever, or, I thought it was just like a 6-week thing. So can you tell a little about, and sorry, this has turned into a therapy talk, but I think this might be interesting is, how you knew when it was time to quote unquote graduate.
Sure. So I think, so there were two things. One, there was, on my end, I realized when I'm going to therapy, it's, I would go to see her Thursday evenings. During the day on Thursday, I would have to start thinking about what I was going to talk to her about that night, because, at this point, it's like, well, I don't really have any pressing issues. There's nothing that's bubbled up for me over the past few days that I really need to, to kind of explore with her. And so it was at the point where I felt like I developed the tools to kind of self-soothe and solve my own problems, or at least navigate them myself. And two, it started feeling like I was going to hang out with a friend for an hour once a week. And I knew that while that was lovely, and I loved my therapist dearly, and I think, a big chunk of last year was spent on kind of a grieving process of no longer having her in my life. I also knew a therapist is not your friend. That's a different relationship. And so I had all of these things in my head. But at the same time, I also was aware there was a possibility that, oh, well, I have this idea that I want to think of myself as fixed. And so maybe I'm just assuming that I'm ready to leave therapy, but I'm not the expert here. So I wasn't actually going to say anything to my therapist. But then I went in for a session in late November of 2017, I guess it was. And she, at the end of our session, said, so I wanted to check in with you on how therapy is going, and essentially whether you still feel like you need to be here every week. So we had that conversation. We mutually agreed that I probably didn't need to. And then we figured out kind of a discharge process. I will say we also did an open discharge, which I think for me was very comforting, because this is a person who was in my life for more than 2 years, probably understood me better than anyone else in my life had to date. And the loss of that relationship, I kind of knew was going to be its own thing to deal with. So having the ability to, shoot her a text or email and come in for a session if I needed one, just having the idea of that, I think, was very helpful to me.
So one of the pieces too that I really want to hear about is this year of new projects. So can you tell us a bit about that and how we can get involved or start our own?
Yeah, sure. So I started Year of New as a 2016 New Year's resolution. And I will fully admit that I have been adhering to it with varying degrees of commitment since then. I think 2016, I was probably the most committed to it, although I've been good in 2019 as well. 2017, 2018, it was a little more touch and go. So basically the resolution that I made was that every day of 2016, I would do one new thing. And so I think the driving force behind this was my desire to live my life more intentionally. And so there's actually been a lot of research around the good things that novelty does for our brains. So it can actually help with learning, help with motivation. And I think this is the most important for me, it really keeps you in the present moment. So if you think about travel, and specifically traveling to somewhere that you've never been before, at least for me, that is an experience where I am fully in the present moment, because you kind of have to be. You don't know where you're going. You don't know all of your surroundings are unfamiliar. Sometimes the language is unfamiliar. And so I wanted a way, so I love to travel, but I wanted a way to bring that feeling of newness that I get from travel into my day-to-day life. And as we mentioned, that was kind of the time that I was starting this was sort of a chaotic period in my life. And I think probably having a daily ritual to focus on kind of helped me navigate that as well.
And so how would you encourage listeners to kind of get started in setting up their own? Because I'm curious, like how you were able to keep with it, because sometimes it's like we have these grand ideas or intentions and then, day 5 rolls around and we're like,
Yeah, no, totally. So I think a big thing for me has been Instagram. So last year, I started a separate Instagram for the project. Before that, I would post my new things on my main Instagram account. I also am a big fan of spreadsheets. I put together a Google Sheet for pretty much every project I do. I also put things in Asana or another project management platform from time to time. But spreadsheets are really how I keep things going for Year of New in particular. And so I will go ahead and plan out certain new things that are already calendared, such as tickets for events that I know I'm going to attend, or a particular birthday celebration or anniversary celebration or something like that. And then from there, I'll also start dropping in potential new things. So one way that I've surfaced a few new things I'd like to do this year is looking at the Atlas Obscura website and finding things that are within, let's say, 5-block radius of my office that I can do during like a quick lunch break walk or something like that. And so for me, it's a mixture of sort of these tentpole events that are the big new things, and then also smaller new things that are a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier to fit into my day-to-day life.
So you recently posted on your blog about how to get out of your own way and do the work, which I think so many people can probably relate to this. And I think this also ties into what you shared in your bio, right? About how you learned to get out of your own way and get the work done. So can you give us some tips on this? And listeners, I will link to this in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. So this is a little bit of background on this piece. So this was a blog post that I wrote after a discussion with some other women in, I'm in a creativity course, and we'd been having this talk about, well, how do you get things done when you're in a position where you have so much anxiety or fear around the thing you're trying to do or the quality of the output that it just paralyzes you and you just can't even take the first step. And so I sort of wrote a little response to that, and then realized, like, oh, this would make a good blog post. And so so the first thing that I advised, and this was actually something that grew out of a conversation with my accountability partner, everyone has anxiety or fear from time to time. It can be very easy to let it snowball and therefore prevent you from really getting anything done at all. And so I think the first piece of advice that I would offer is to just make that first step or that first task as small as possible. So one of my friends, I was speaking with her, is actually my accountability partner. We were speaking about a spec script that she was writing, and she was really just having trouble getting started. And so I said, well, why don't you just, open a document and do something extremely simple, even if it's just, one character saying hello to the other. And the goal of that isn't really, obviously that's not going to be some revolutionary line of dialogue that changes the direction of the entire show. But what it does help you with is just getting over the hurdle of not even having started the project. And at least for me, that can be the hardest thing, just getting that first word or first sentence onto the page. And then, if even if that first step, you get it done and you still are finding yourself in a place of fear, I think just identify another little tiny step that you can take and just keep doing that until you are more focused on getting the work done than about, the ideas in your head about, that are preventing you from getting the work done.
Yeah, it's like taking that micro movement, right? That little tiny step to just kind of move forward. Because sometimes too, once you get started, it's like, it starts to flow, but it's just taking that first step.
That's so true. Yeah. And then another thing that a practice that I recently incorporated into my creative process is productivity sprints. And so some people, use Pomodoro method where you do, I think, 25 minutes of work followed by a 5-minute break. I don't always think about the break portion so much, but I attended this event in New York put on by Creative Morning, which is actually an international organization that hosts breakfast events for the creative community. So I've been attending their events for the past couple of years, and they also started doing these field trips. And so I attended a field trip that was co-hosted by an organization called Cave Day that runs productivity sprints. And so I went to one of their little field trips, and then it was kind of a revolutionary. It was sort of like, I already know all these tips about productivity. I think I have a pretty good handle on how I work and how to get the most out of my work time. And I was so wrong, and I had so much more to learn. And so after when I attended that event, we did just a quick 20-minute productivity sprint, and I learned that I could write 800 words of fiction during 20 minutes, which is, I think, about 3 to 4 times faster than I thought I was capable of writing fiction. And so that has now dramatically changed how I do literally all of my creative work. And so from a productivity standpoint, it's great because I can get a lot more done. But perhaps more importantly, when I hit a key part of it is that when I hit the timer to start it, I make a deal with myself that I'm not going to entertain any sort of internal drama around, is the idea that I've decided to write for 20 minutes the right idea or a good idea, or is there a better idea? It's simply pick an idea, get started, go for 20 minutes, and you're done. And I think if you can get to a place where your only goal is output and you don't think about the quality of the output, to me, that's really the sweet spot. And that has, just paid tremendous dividends for me. And then the other thing I think is related is detachment from outcomes. You can't control what happens after you put a piece of art or any other type of work out into the universe, but what you can control is whether the art exists at all. And so for me, I've found that feeling like I have control over a situation is extremely important in terms of my own in terms of being able to feel present, not worry about the past or the future. And so the more that I feel like, whatever I'm working on is something that's within my power, the better. And when I focus on the actual work that I'm doing itself and not what I'm hoping it will, turn into in the future, that's a lot easier for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Not focusing on the outcome, because it's like, write with your writer mind versus your editor mind,
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Write now and edit later for sure.
Now, what about, and this kind of goes along the lines of what we're just talking about, but how do you encourage us to create space in our life for the art, right? So, you find those 20-minute chunks, and writing 800 words in 20 minutes is, oh my gosh, amazing. But how do you encourage people to find, the space? Because I think that's the piece that prevents people from actually diving into their creative selves, is just this feeling of overwhelm and not enough time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think, I don't know, it's kind of twofold. So it's one, make sure that you actually are honest with yourself about whether this is something you really want to do. So I think for me, one of the ways that I make time is by turning down other things that I could spend my time on. I think that's really challenging. So that's kind of, so one, turn down things. I think that's a form of sort of honoring commitments that you make to yourself, right? So I've heard this analogy a lot, but people talk about how, you put something on your calendar to, have a meeting with another person or go out to lunch or whatever it is. And you treat that as though, well, it's in my calendar, it's written in stone. But we don't always do that with things that we're doing for ourselves. And so for me, if I am going to work on something, it's in my calendar. And once it's in my calendar, that sort of reorients my brain to view something as a solid commitment. I think also, living more creatively or creating space for art, it doesn't have to be this huge undertaking. And so I think the way that I've started thinking about this, sort of in line with my Year of New project, is that you kind of at times just need to think a little bit smaller. So for example, you might want to take a different route to work. So let's say you always take the train that gets you there the fastest, take a different train that involves a little bit more walking, or pick a coffee shop that you've never been to before and stop there on your way somewhere instead of the one that you always stop at. Or one thing that I did as a Year of New item, I think last year, was I just stopped in a park in the city and listened to a guided meditation on a park bench. I also did the same thing at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden a few months ago. So just little things like that. And you really only need to carve out maybe, 10, 20 minutes to do them. But I think they do pay dividends in terms of how you feel afterwards. And then, if you're able to do these things with some regularity, I think it does kind of shift your perspective of your life and what your life means and how you're living it.
Yeah, great ideas. I mean, it is. It's these little small steps that we can take every single day to infuse a bit more. It's like, snapping photos on your way to work. It's like to update your Instagram feed and, of just beautiful, simple pleasures. I mean, there's just so many things that we can do, to keep this creative spark kind of interwoven with everything that we do, the way we live our lives.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think one of the things that I've been struggling with lately is that I can't do all of the things all the time. And so there might be, my focus for January was writing. I wrote a lot in January, and I've been a little bit disappointed that I haven't had as much time to write in February, but I was doing a big podcast project. And so I don't know, there are unfortunately only so many hours in the day. And there are going to be ebbs and flows, and there might be a week where you're able to do maybe 3 little kind of mini artist dates, to borrow a phrase from Julia Cameron, but other weeks where maybe you literally can't squeeze in anything, or you can squeeze in one thing, but it's just grabbing a quick latte, to take with you to work instead of sitting and enjoying it with a croissant or whatever it is.
So let's chat about how we met. So I remember meeting you in Brooklyn at the Tranquility Tour pop-up.
Yes. And so, this is honestly, it's really such an honor to be on Tranquility du Jour today, because this is the first podcast that I ever listened to. And so I found you back in, I want to say December 2006. And it was, I barely knew what a podcast was, but I was kind of digging around the iTunes podcast listings and somehow stumbled across your podcast and started listening to it, and it was immediately hooked. And it's interesting, I've been listening to a bunch of episodes recently as sometimes I'll listen to one as I'm working, and I find that listening to Tranquility du Jour now, over 12 years later, I really get that same relaxed feeling that I felt when I started listening to you in 2006. So it's really been amazing to be kind of on this journey with you over the past dozen years. And so then we met for the first time, I believe was that 2013 that you were doing the tour?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so we did that really fun workshop pop-up in, I think it was at was it Marlena's house? I'm trying to think of.
Yep, Marina. Yeah,
Marina. Sorry,
that's okay.
Blanking on her name.
Yeah.
So we did that in Brooklyn, and then and I got to reconnect with you again in person a few months ago in Manhattan as well.
Yeah, which is so fun at the August meetup, and then you came down for the New Year's Day salon, and it was such a treat to have you.
it was such a treat to be there. And so just getting back to Year of New for a second, on January 1st, I try to do a big intentional thing to set the right tone for the year. And so part of the reason why I decided to come down for the New Year salon was that I knew that, joining you and other like-minded women on the 1st would definitely help me do that for 2019. So it was really a blessing to be able to be there.
Well, and one of the things too that you did is you wrote about how I get things done, and you mentioned the New Year's salon. So can you speak a little bit to that also of how you get things done?
Yeah. Okay. I'm like, all right, how do I get things done? So I already mentioned Cave Day, which is I actually joined them. They have a monthly membership and they do these day-long productivity sprints as well, which are really great. So I went to the first one of those, or my first one of those last month, and I think I'll continue going. So that's been a big recent thing for me. And then getting back to the New Year's salon. So I think intention setting is huge. Making sure that the things you're trying to get done are the right things for you, that they align with your values, that they align with where you are in your life at this exact moment, and they're really the highest priority items for you. And so, just being able to spend that day with you and everyone else and going through all of our activities and the pre-work, I think was really helpful to me in figuring out, well, what are the things that I want in my life in 2019? And then from there, okay, now that I've identified them, what are the goals that feed into them? And then what are the smaller, measurable, SMART goals that I can break these down into to ensure that I succeed? And then the other big thing for me has been my accountability partner, who I mentioned earlier. I think she's a filmmaker, director named Ivy Jelisovac, and she is someone I randomly met online. And so every 2 weeks, we do a Google Hangout call where we talk about our different projects, looming deadlines we have, what our goals are for the next couple of weeks. And then we also kind of check in regularly via text and see what's happening. And we've become actually really close friends, in addition to, I think both of us have been more creatively productive since we've been working together over the past year. So that's been really great. And it's funny because she's based in Germany. I'm obviously based in New York. And yet we have this kind of cross-Atlantic friendship/partnership that seems to be really serving both of us pretty well.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I love that you have that. And as we talked about at New Year's Salon, and many people know how important it is to have an accountability buddy, right? Somebody who they are literally like, yes, so I wrote this many words today, or these are my goals for this month or this quarter. And so I love that it's worked out so well for you, especially with someone across like the world.
Yeah, it's been really great. And then one other accountability tool, that you can take advantage of, even if you don't have an accountability buddy or partner to work with, you can sort of force accountability. So one of the projects that I've participated in over the past few months, so there's a novelist named Jamie Attenberg, and she's done a couple of projects on Twitter where she uses, the last year it was hashtag 1,000 words of summer. And so the goal was to write 1,000 words every day. And then she did one starting January 1st, which was very convenient for me and kind of helped me, really kick off my writing projects for the year. And that was hashtag 1,000 words of winter. And some of us are actually still moving forward and doing that project. And so that sort of created community on Twitter in an interesting way. And if you don't check in with your word count for a few days, inevitably someone will, tag you in a post and say, hey, how's the writing going? Just wanted to check in. So that also has helped me with accountability. And I wrote an insane amount of words and pages in January as a result of it.
So my last question for you, Kat, is that the name of this podcast, obviously, is Tranquility du Jour. So I'm curious, how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So I think a big thing is one of my New Year's resolutions this year has been to meditate every day. I think that helps a lot. Just having a set of things that I do every single day, that just, I don't know, it kind of helps me feel on track, which for a person who, as I mentioned earlier, has, had some achievement orientation to deal with, I think I've sort of found a way to translate that into something that's a little bit healthier. So I think productivity for me is okay. That's a healthy place. It's more when I become too concerned about the outcome, and it's really about external achievement that it becomes problematic for me. So being able to kind of check things off a list is actually a source of peace for me, interestingly enough. So I obviously the kind of classic things, sipping tea. We mentioned crystals earlier. Whenever I find myself getting let's say I'm upset about something that's happening, or I'm feeling myself get stressed out or anxious, and maybe things are piling up at work, I will do a breathing exercise where I breathe in for 4 counts, hold it for 7 counts, and then release it for 8 counts. And this is something I got from some random person on Twitter that has actually proven to be a very helpful tool for me. And so I'll just kind of keep doing that until I feel like my nervous system has sort of returned to a level of relative calm, and I can keep going with whatever it is. And then I think a big thing for me is anytime that I feel myself kind of getting out of tranquility, I try to identify one thing on my to-do list that I can do. And I do the work of kind of getting out of the drama of, well, I have all these things to do, and just focus on the one thing, pretend there's nothing else, and move forward with whatever that one thing is. And then finally, and this is probably my biggest thing, and I can't believe I didn't say it first, I routinely put my phone on airplane mode so that I am not constantly reacting to it. So there's a lot of advice about don't check your email first thing in the morning. Frankly, for me, email is not an issue. It's more about text messages, Twitter direct messages, people tweeting at me, or worrying about whether someone's responding to something I've posted on social, things like that. I think it's very easy to get into that sort of reactive mindset, especially with our extremely connected world. And so going on airplane mode gives me the feeling of, it helps me be present in the moment, focus on what's in front of me instead of things that might be happening however many miles away. And I think that's actually been maybe the most valuable thing that I do for myself, is just checking out. And sometimes I'll take it a little bit farther. And, during the workday, I might turn it off for a couple of hours at most. Sometimes I will declare a weekend, to be for a DIY creative retreat. And then I'll just put my phone on airplane mode for at least 24, if not 48 hours.
I love that. That's so smart.
I really, and it's funny because people have asked me, oh, well, or have said, if I put my phone on airplane mode, I think the entire time I'd be freaking out about whether people had texted me back or whatever. And I guess I have the opposite feeling about it. As long as my phone's on airplane mode, I frankly don't know what's happening inside my phone at that moment. And so I can make up any self-soothing story I need to hear. So if I'm waiting for someone to text me, I can tell myself, oh, well, that person texted me, 20 minutes ago, I just haven't seen it yet. Or that person already retweeted the thing where I tagged them, or whatever, seemingly minor thing that snowballs into a major distraction. You can always just sort of invent a new story for it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kat, for all the great inspiration and ideas. And I love this, challenge that you gave yourself. I think it's so smart, and it's a fun, creative way for us to think about how do we infuse more newness and excitement into our everyday.
Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. This is a blast.
So over in the show notes at KimberlyWilson.com/444, you will find a link to Kat's blog, find her on Instagram, and then also find her Year of New on Instagram. There's also a link in the show notes to the Tranquility Spring Sneak Peek video from last Friday, and also a link to the various blog posts that we discussed, from how to get out of your own way and do the work, how Kat gets things done, and how to create space in life for art. So finally, in the show notes, you'll find links to all of my social media handles. Let's hang out. Let's connect. Love hearing from you. Appreciate your comments. Appreciate your kindness. Appreciate your support. Appreciate you listening here. And then also there is a link to Year of Tranquility. Again, my latest book. You can find all this over at KimberlyWilson.com/444. So wishing you a wonderful week ahead. Sorry for the wind and whatnot that's probably blowing in the background, but I wanted to just drop a little note in and let you know that I was thinking of you this week and wishing you a delightful week. Namaste.